Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of SaaS Monday live on Friday. Can't believe it's already episode 11. It's such a good time. It's been going so fast. I'm joined by two of kind of the original kind of founders of SaaS Mondays, and so the folks that you probably recognize if you've been following our series in terms of Erwin and Marcus, both from AWS. I'll let them introduce themselves here in a second. But we've got a guest commentator on the show today on our panel in terms of Luke, and I'm going to have Luke introduce himself here in a second as well. Our topic today is from prompt to product, and so a couple of weeks ago we talked about, we kind of raised the concept of, hey, is it now possible to be a solo unicorn? So can you actually build a B2B SaaS app, get it to $1 billion status with just one person? So I mean, is AI to the point where you can actually do everything? And so a couple of weeks ago when we brought that up, we were talking to one of the founders of Rocks, which is a really cool AI startup that does go to market, and it adds a lot of AI intelligence to the go to market. If you didn't watch that series, go back and watch that series. Fun and interesting conversation. But we started to then get into, hey, how are those founders using AI and within the development side itself? And so that's why we brought Luke, and Luke is an expert in that space, and that's what Luke's building for a living. And so we'll let him talk about OriginAI and what he's building over there in a second. But before we get there, let's just introduce the crew. So Erwin, you want to go first, kind of walk through who you are and how you got here?
So, hi to everyone. So, Luke, nice to talk to you again. My name is Erwin. I'm a senior solutions architect at AWS, working primarily with SaaS startups, right? So, SaaS B2B startups, helping them build great products in the cloud. So, my background is also, I used to build SaaS before SaaS was term. I was telling that to Luke before, and I actually continued those things, or helping startups build SaaS at AWS. Not sure if I mentioned I'm located here in Munich, Germany. So looking forward to today's show.
Love it. And Marcus?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Marcus, my name. I share much of the track record that Ermin was outlining before, based out of Munich, working for AWS as a solutions architect, working and in the B2B SaaS space for more than a decade. Originally co-founder, CTO myself in that space. But what we see now all the time is that Agentic AI is creeping into the product so much, right? So it all started with the development space where developers were adopting it, but now I think it's more and more coming ubiquitous, and hence I'm super interested to hear from you, Luke. What's your perspective? What do you see on the market? And can't wait to have a really engaging conversation over here.
Love it. Okay, and now the guest star for the day, Luke. Can you kind of talk us through both who you are and where you came from, as well as kind of give us the origin story for OriginAI?
Yeah, the origin story for Origin. Yeah. So I'm Luke. Guys, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm the CEO and founder of Origin. My story goes back actually some 25 years. I've now been building kind of technical solutions. To put that in perspective, I saw the birth of the internet. I saw the birth of JavaScript, better or worse, and kind of everything kind of from that point onwards, which has been obviously a pretty kind of amazing journey. It's taken me through marketing agencies. It's taken me through the music industry around the time of kind of Spotify and iTunes first kind of appearing. Super interesting kind of technical challenges around obviously that for a music label, which was EMI where I was working. Then went through an MBA. I kind of felt like I was being kind of typecast as just tech. I'd been a developer and a technical architect, and always knew I wanted to do kind of more than that. And so I did the MBA and ended up working for eBay then for a number of years. Again, super interesting place to work, right? Where you really have to kind of invent things. There aren't kind of off the shelf kind of things that you can take for a lot of the challenges, right, that they have. Then left to start my first startup, which was called Lazook. It was a B2B e-commerce platform that basically helped brands sell more directly on channels like eBay and Amazon and so forth. I sold that in 2018. And then from there joined Bain & Company as part of their innovation team as an associate partner there to help build out that innovation team, and finally left to start OriginAI, which obviously I'll talk a little bit more about. I guess end to end, I've always been kind of writing code, but that last kind of 7 years, there was a real kind of shift, through the consulting period towards AI, but pre-Gen AI, to be honest, in the more kind of traditional machine learning sense to start with in a lot of the projects we were working on, and then later into Gen AI. And for me, I've always had this kind of fascination with automating the creation of software. So even before Gen AI, I was fascinated in what could be done in kind of an automated fashion to do that. And obviously, alongside that, I was monitoring what was going on with the different models, right, as they were progressing. And there was a real kind of watershed moment for me when I saw GPT-4 when it first came out. GPT 3.5 was and 3. I mean, amazing, right? I mean, they were already. It was like kind of alien technology had landed, right? And nobody knew what was going on with it. But GPT, it was kind of obvious that it was kind of just writing the next kind of most obvious thing, right? GPT-4, when I used it, I immediately realized that it could do logic, right? Logic that it wasn't kind of trained on, this sort of emergent behavior, right, that came out of the model somehow that I think realistically we still don't fully understand, right, like how that works. But I immediately realized that was going to enable AI not just to write snippets of code, but actually to build the huge jigsaw puzzle, right, which is a large scale kind of enterprise code base. And I knew I wanted to be on that train, right? I could see it at the station. And so I jumped ship to then work on directly on Origin and bootstrapped it for about 8 months, just trying to understand, is it actually possible already? Is it too easy, right, to get AI to build proper enterprise code bases? Or is it impossible, right? Really, when I started, it could have been either end of that spectrum. And that was really the point that we started. Then kind of refining, okay, what type of applications do we want Origin to be able to build? And, what are the challenges that we can solve today? And what are the challenges that we think we might be able to solve kind of in the future?
This is, if I can jump in, Mike, sorry to interrupt. I always wanted to ask you, look, because, it's a quite brave move to do, right? So you saw 4.0 GPT, you thought, okay, this can do more, right? So I always, I kind of admire what you did there, because in theory, easier step and more safe step would be to say, okay, let me create some kind of, coding helper for developers that will use my plugin in whatever Visual Studio Code or whatever, and then this will help developers, but the human will still actually build the code. So you went the full 9 miles, how you say that, right? So you decided actually to build machine that builds, build a software that builds and deploys software, end to end, right? So how did you ever doubt that this is actually good way to do it?
I think there's probably 2 reasons for that. One is kind of a personal failing. I think that despite all of the kind of innovation stuff that I've done over time, I tend to get completely fascinated by the kind of moonshot, right? And everything else that comes kind of before it, I just kind of assume is going to be kind of a red ocean, right, of people fighting over that space, which arguably is, right, kind of, at this point in terms of developer tooling. So I have to admit, I never really looked at that. And I would say the other reason for that was that from my Bain time, I kind of grew. I came to believe quite strongly that the real money for something like this was going to come when a business person, a non-technical person, could take a business problem and translate that using a platform into real software that solved that business problem. And that was going to be the real kind of inflection point, right, for everything. Because I'd seen it a lot in Bain, like when teams knew what they wanted to build, they knew the business tooling that they needed, but getting it on, either getting budget signed off for an external company to build it, or getting it on the roadmap for an internal tech team was, I mean, you guys would appreciate it's the same anywhere, right? Like same at AWS, same anywhere. Getting stuff on the roadmap is incredibly difficult. And so a lot of these tools that everyone agrees would drive value just never happen. Right. So the combination of these two things, I think I saw that as the end goal anyway. And I've never been very good at thinking about the attempting the stepping stones. Before I knew it, the market had matured to the point where obviously we had all kinds of options in that coding space, right? In the kind of cursor and client and all of this type of thing space. So trying to attack that market at that point seemed like it was already too late, right, to some extent.
Love it. I do want to go back to one of the things you said originally, because I do think, and everyone listening to this podcast probably also had the same moment of when you came across that moment where you realized this generation of AI is different. Something has dramatically changed, and it changed faster than we ever expected it to change. And for me, it was also GPT-4, and for me, it was actually reading an article by Microsoft Research where they said, at the time I was dabbling as well. Everyone was kind of playing around with it, and it was really good at writing poems for me, or this, that, and the other, which was cute. Occasionally, it would make some blaringly obvious errors, but it was at the time it was clear the next word was coming, but it was not. It didn't really feel that generative. And the Microsoft guys put this put a couple of tests together in which they asked it to draw a unicorn in a language no one ever uses. So they know for a fact there's no way it could have found this reference on the internet somewhere. And it drew a unicorn. Then they removed the horn from the unicorn, reversed it, and said, hey, this is a horse, turn it into a unicorn. And again, in this really obscure programming language, it did that. And at that point, the Microsoft engineer said, okay, we understood that it did it. We don't understand how it did it. And that's where things got weird and interesting for me. And that was a pretty big moment for me as well. And I suspect everyone on this list has that. Marcus, by chance, do you have kind of that one moment where in the last year you realized AI is different? Because 6-7 months ago, it was not this. I mean, 8 or 9 months ago, it was not this. But suddenly it is.
I mean, for sure, right? So I think we all looked at some of the coding companion tools, and believe it or not, half a year back, it was like, yeah, I mean, it was so la, right? You could use it for some use cases, maybe, create some documentation or help you understand what some code is doing, because this was always just assisting or, bringing things forward to the actual developer who would then make sense out of it. But it was like, I don't know exactly the time, but I think May this year and so on, where it was making a significant leap, and it could suddenly, due to multiple factors, start really producing code that would work, right? It would not hallucinate as much as before. Most of the time, the code would run for the first attempt and not after giving a couple of iterations to it. And I mean, that brings a lot of confidence to the developer that this is actually helping them to get productive, right? So if they are just tinkering around with something that is trying to make it up, there will be no confidence that at the end of the day, this is able to process or to kind of create a meaningful code to an extent where, a business person, like you mentioned it, Luke, would be, capable to use it. And maybe one more moment was, I was looking at some of the interviews that the Y Combinator partners were giving. And what it turned out is that basically all the recent Y Combinator cohorts, they don't have, I mean, it's not that they don't have a technical co-founder anymore, but they don't code as much, right? So they are saying, hey, this 0 to 1 moment where we have a prototype that is working, that's something that they just, do vibe coding wise, or with some of the tools. And then, once they see, okay, there is a material interest in that, and now we need to, scale it, and now we need to make it robust, and all the kind of non-functional requirements that then come to the table. This is where the engineering team starts really to engaging with the software, but with the knowledge that from a feature perspective, this is something where they have seen already some interest.
And even that, the question is actually how long you will actually need, engineering team, or at which moment you will need an engineering team. I was in a panel discussion on AWS Summit with Luke, and I just kind of reflecting, the questions that was 2 months ago, but questions that I was asking then, right? So like, do you really think that enterprises will use OriginAI to generate, tools since, like internal SaaS or whatever? Those questions are obsolete now. I also remember that I was complaining that it's very easy to get to 80%, but then from that point on, it's actually getting very hard, and I need to invest a lot of time. Now that obstacle is also kind of, removed, and I can see applications being developed by vibe coding platforms, let's call it like that, and being delivered.
I think it's still, for me at least, I think there's still some context to what's easy, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit more, right? But I feel like depending on what you are trying to build, you will still get drastically different results.
Agree.
So I guess that's a fair point. So let's kind of start diving into it. And so let's just let's just walk through the title of our session itself, and I think that will join. So it starts with prompt, and we're going to go to product. And so I use AI every day, and I find I find almost all the AI tools incredibly good at what I do, at what it does, which is, help me finish this, or finish this thought, or schedule this. But the AI is using a lot of inference from the information I'm providing it, and I happen to be an expert in my space. And so all AI seems to be a very good extension of me. And that extension of me, another way of saying that, is the prompt. So the prompts I'm giving it. And so Luke, can you kind of walk us through, from an engineering point of view, when you guys are saying prompts, where are we, what does that mean, and where are we in that, and how much expertise and guidance is still needed? And so let's start at prompt, and then we'll delve into what the product looks like, and the engineering review and the process as we go. So prompt. What do we mean when we say prompt in the dev world? What does prompt mean in the OriginAI story? And I'm guessing Origin's probably a little different in terms of what you can do in prompts than others, and so you can do a little product plug here at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, and it gets to the heart of what we were saying. For a developer, maybe we start there, and obviously I fall into this bracket, right? So obviously I fall into this camp as well, where I start thinking, wow, I'm vibe coding way more than I'm writing code. A little bit worried parts of my brain are kind of gradually going to sleep, right? In that regard, but when I look at the types of things that I'm prompting and the type of things that I'm getting it to do, what I found is certainly that prompts that have anything to do with, say, front end code like React, this type of stuff, really are going to succeed most of the time. But as soon as you get into territories where the training data for these models is perhaps a little more sparse, CloudFormation might be a good example, then things just really start getting a little crazy, a lot of the time. And if someone is coming at that as a non-expert, then you can very quickly end up in a frustrating rabbit hole, right? Where the AI is leading you in a direction which is really very wrong based on the conversational context, but you have no idea, right, that is the case. And because it does so well on those other types of prompts, it's very easy to make the assumption that if you just keep plugging away, that you're going to get to where you want to go. But there's definitely, if you're in the developer kind of prompt generation world, there's definitely a moment when you need to take stock and realize, wait, I may be going down a rabbit hole here. I need to step back, and I need to ask it to actually explain the concepts to me here, rather than just writing the code, because then armed with that, I can probably get a better result, right, kind of faster. But this is really kind of close to the metal still, right, when it comes to prompts, if the analogy kind of makes sense. For Origin, the prompts are completely different, as you point out, because our target customer are business users who know nothing about databases or cloud environments or React or anything like that. And this differentiates us a little bit from other kind of players that have done well kind of recently. We don't show people the code unless they really kind of want to see it, right? It's an otherwise kind of hidden process, and we expect people to communicate with us in a non-technical language, right? So all of our agents are instructed to understand that the user is non-technical. We found over time that enforcing that was also not good, because people exist on kind of a spectrum, right? They're not just non-technical or very technical. They're sometimes somewhere in between, and it can be very frustrating if you want to talk about, say, the structure of a database, or the fact that you want to use an API rather than do something in the front end, and it won't let you. So there's some balance, right, to be had there. But with Origin, you start with a non-technical prompt. It turns that prompt into basically a work plan, a project plan of epics and stories. Those stories are written, if you clicked on them, you would see they're written more in a sort of product language than they are in a business language. Then it will start working through those stories. And we did that because we found that if you try and bite off everything at once, then you almost always end up with problems. Then it takes the first story, and it will look at it, and it will figure out, okay, how architecturally will I approach this problem? It will come up with the architecture changes that it needs. Then it will take that and actually start building the different kind of code and infrastructure as code pieces. Then it will deploy any infrastructure that it needs. At the moment, we're only AWS, so this gets deployed through, in the back end, kind of AWS SAM. But again, the user knows nothing about this, right? It's chosen the infrastructure, it's written the infrastructure as code, and it's deployed into AWS. Then it runs through various checks, sense checks, and then finally displays that story's output right to the user and says, hey, is this working? And if it hits any problems in any of those iterative checks, then it will itself automatically loop back around and try and resolve that. If there was some kind of build error, for example, that it hit. So it really is the kind of end-to-end flow. And it's a good point that you make, right? That when we talk about prompts, like clearly that is a very different thing to the type of prompt that an engineer is sitting down and putting into ChatGPT or wherever they're working.
Do you also have possibility as a product manager or whatever you are now, vibe coder, like someone who would like to, the product to be developed, to go back to one of those user stories and then, edit it and then change it so that, the machine behind can actually understand better what it needs to do?
We need more features to edit in line than we have at the moment. That's been a common request. But what you can do is, so you can't do that directly at the moment. You can remove stories if you think they're not relevant, and when it finishes a story, you can say, hey, actually, that's not what I was thinking at all. Let's do it, and it will stay on that story and modify it, right, based on your feedback. But we clearly, we make no claims to be anything other than in the early stages of our kind of maturity from a product perspective. So those types of features are certainly on the horizon.
Because the parallel that I'm trying to draw is back in the days when human used to code, right? So what we had is usually a project manager or product owner or someone who would write specification, who would then probably talk to development team or talk to engineers, and then that frustration was there as well, right? So I remember back in the days that product managers always were looking for that one developer who can understand business and code and translate it somehow in that language, right? So the frustration that we have now still exists. It's just that it's actually you cannot expect from the machine to know the whole context immediately, right? So that's why I was asking, right? You would actually go there, refine your user story, get the second part of the whatever module build, and then you would check if everything works and then move forward. So, but
it's
it just
it's a
became
balance. It's
simpler, right?
definitely a balance, I think, and I think one of the things that's been interesting to me watching and seeing like feedback right on people use the platform is, in reality, what Origin is doing is something that would have taken maybe a developer a week or something, right? It's doing it in maybe less than 30 minutes, right, in total. So like to some extent, there's an element here of one needing to give people something to push against very quickly, right? And because we can generate that thing much quicker, that first version, than we could in the past, we found that it's maybe better to get to that point and give something that someone can then critique, right, than it is to kind of get them to sort of approve the plan, so to speak, right, in detail. I mean, I mean, you guys tell me if you had a different experience throughout your careers, but when a kind of Word document kind of specification landed on my desk, I would start getting kind of like shivers up my spine. Not a chance that either A, it was complete in any way, and B, that there was not a chance that anyone had actually read it to the point of understanding everything in it. And everything I've seen in AI just reiterates this fact, right? As human beings, we speak this like crazily ambiguous language, right? Even if we think we're really good at it and we've written some like perfect, specification document, the reality is we haven't, right? And so it really kind of, for me, it really kind of proves out the kind of agile mindset of saying, you know what? No, like, look, give me what you think you're talking about. I'll give you something that, as I interpret that, and then you can tell me very quickly, like whether we're moving in the right direction. And I think we're getting to the point now where we can do that so quickly with these tools that starts becoming an actual viable workflow. Whereas maybe even 6 months ago, that wasn't the case.
So let's go back and kind of focus in on the workflow, because and where we're at in the progression. And so we're starting with prompts. The prompt then gives us something that we all agree 7 months ago was mediocre, but at least it wasn't the blank piece of paper. So it allowed us to go faster. And now we go from prompt to something that is pretty darn close to workable. But there's that nirvana that you're kind of describing there, which I know you don't believe we're entirely there yet. None of us do, but that's the story. And I have a little bit of concerns about that nirvana, because I've got my friend Marcus here. Marcus is an expert on bringing people, on letting people or allowing people to build great businesses on AWS, and he's your expert on, hey, if you get stuck, so you kind of painted a story where I don't need Marcus, and so that concerns me a little. It may concern Marcus too, but we both know that that's not entirely true yet, and that's not the story we're painting. So let's kind of talk through where we're at in that progression. And so Marcus has deep expertise on lots of things on AWS, and one of the things I point out is if you're using AI to draw a picture of a unicorn, we're all experts in that. So AI draws a picture of a unicorn, it's a bad picture of a unicorn. You look at it and say, that's not a unicorn. Try again. That's not a unicorn. Try again. And when it finally gets you the right unicorn, you say, hey, perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. That's the unicorn. But when it comes to an application, and an application running well on AWS, most of us aren't experts in that. Well, I do have friends like Marcus who are. And so, how do we get from, moving from the prompt of, hey, draw me a unicorn, to it actually drawing a unicorn, and I don't have to be an expert in what a new unicorn looks like because the unicorn's there. So kind of let's kind of continue down that process and that work. And I don't mean to. Are you afraid of AI, Marcus, or is it a tool? I was teasing a little bit on your behalf here, but maybe that's the next question is where does the role of cloud specialists who are helping organizations go to? How is AI changing your job on a daily basis right now?
So I think currently we are still in the stage where I think as you are saying, right? It's the question is like, can you also ask the right questions? And if you can, right, you are probably already very well off with all the tools that you have at your disposal as of today. But if you can't, or if you need to fill the void on your own, then it's probably still the place where you will have, you better need somebody by your side that gives you a hint on, what's ahead of you, not what's like on your plate already. So I think that's the gist of it. But I think it's maybe also very keen to hear from Luke, right? So where do you see this is like OriginAI is currently used, and what are the, let's say, good use cases and what you are building it for, and what are probably the blank spaces that you are aware of, but you are not there yet.
Well, I mean, maybe building on what you were saying, from my perspective, front end's kind of done. Right? I mean, they'll improve, et cetera, but even back when we had V0, which was the first one that kind of blew my mind, in terms of generation, it was amazing. But backends are not solved. So there is still a huge amount of work to do there. And if I think about backends, I think about AWS, right? Like, piecing together all of these different services. For whatever reason, the training data in these models is light years different, on the front end stuff versus stuff like CloudFormation and understanding how to configure your DynamoDB database, right? Or your Redis cache, or like whatever it is, right? If I recently did a bit of work on Azure, and trying to switch to that with the help of ChatGPT was like the blind leading the blind. It was terrible, right? It was almost impossible to get anything kind of useful out of it. And so really this whole space of kind of back-end infrastructure is certainly still a challenge, and it's one that Origin is obviously trying to make huge jumps in, and we discovered very early that we were not going to be able to do it just by relying on the models, right? So a huge amount of our kind of IP, I guess, if you will, is how we get that to work, right? And for it to understand how to stand up the right databases and connect them in the right way, and make sure that the authentication pieces work, and all these things that a front-end developer would never kind of think of. But so I guess my answer to the question would be slightly, with Origin, there are more things that are possible. The only other service, and we've tested them regularly, that I think can achieve similar things, or at least in the same direction, is probably Replit. I've had some good experiences with that, but we're still not in the situation where it can build anything, right? We deliberately limit the AWS services that it can use, because we have to go through this extra effort, right, to make sure that it can kind of control them properly. So at the moment, Origin focuses on this kind of business tooling. We sometimes at the moment call it this sort of low-hanging SaaS fruit, so to speak. CRMs, time tracking tools, anything that falls into this bracket where you're really modeling kind of data. You need different team members to access it and manipulate it, and so on and so forth. That's really the target. And from an Origin perspective, we've seen a lot of people from things like agencies, for example, or kind of internal product teams, kind of using it from that kind of perspective. And from what I understand, to be honest with you, on the grapevine of the whole industry, including our competitors, the sticky revenue is coming from that type of use case, right? Where either internal product teams are building these kind of MVP versions of things, or agencies or whatever it might be that are getting that ongoing benefit, versus your sort of non-technical first-time founder that is trying to build their entire startup from using a kind of vibe coding tool. They give it a go, and sometimes they get good results, but a lot of the time, the teams that are continuing to pay are these ones that are getting this like continued kind of use out of it. Now, from an Origin perspective, we're trying to push that boundary a little bit, because we're saying, actually, we want to be targeting people that maybe are in small businesses. Maybe they're paying a lot for current tools, like maybe time tracking tools like Float or HubSpot, this type of thing. And they recognize that maybe they're not using all of the features, and they recognize that actually they could use something like Origin and get both the benefit of something completely flexible, right, and something potentially dramatically cheaper. So that really is our sweet spot for the type of thing that people will build.
Can I just jump in, Mike, here? Sorry to interrupt. So this is also where I failed, right? So when using vibe coding, I was actually quite good in getting helper apps out, right? That could be used within organization or, for my own purposes, like, task tracker, Kanban boards, some kind of, different time tracking tools, or, task lists. This works. What I failed to deliver, and maybe I should try it again, right, is actually a SaaS product that has kind of, B2B SaaS interface where different businesses would actually log in and then be able to. I then started facing hundreds of different issues that are typical for SaaS, from deployment models to tenant isolation to authentication to all those things, right? And it was rather than frustrating for me, because you did mention SaaS, right? Do you see customers on your side who are able to develop a new product, a SaaS product, and using vibe coding and then offer it to their customers?
I would say your experience is very much the truthful experience of a lot of people using kind of vibe coding tools. I see, honestly, some of my competitors, I see these fantastical claims, honestly, right, of the things that people are building, which I know are not possible, right, with these platforms. Like, it is very much possible to produce something that's a good start and then give it to an engineer or an agency, that's popping up to do the last mile. 100%, right? But to go from 0 to 100 at the moment on something of that complexity, where you're tackling exactly all the things that the type of things that you're describing, that is where the real complexity of this jigsaw puzzle kind of comes in, right? And it's the one that we now partially tackle. Whether you would get all the way to where you were looking for, I think it would still be a challenge. But for me, the trajectory is very clear. Right, that will be achievable, in relatively short order, right? But at the moment is an extraordinarily complicated thing for it to figure out.
You also have the situation, as you described, right? It felt like, hey, these are standalone applications, right? But in a business, oftentimes what you need is connected applications, right? You already have a CRM system that you cannot, easily replace, but you need, some information out there. Otherwise, you would need to go through an Excel export and an import function, and that we all know sucks, right? So how is this connectivity, this integration to other tools and services that an SMB customer may use? How is that, on your roadmap?
I kind of feel, Owen, you might have to stop it. When we did this, when this question was asked in the panel, Owen had to stop us because honestly, we could have done the entire panel on that one question. I feel, my personal opinion, and we've kind of gone all in a little bit on this, it's basically MCP. I very much believe that one of the nice things about using an MCP server to connect to various other tools, regardless of what they might be, is that the interface is very, very clean and understood, versus current API standards, which often vary depending on the individual interface. So what I expect to see, and what we're kind of working towards, is that if Origin can build software that can discover or be given, right, access to an MCP server that then in turn has access to whatever the data is that's required. HubSpot would be an example, right? Zapier has done some amazing stuff here. They actually have an MCP server that can then connect to anything that they can connect to, right? Which is which is actually the one that we're currently working with on kind of implementing, because we like the idea of that obviously a lot. I think that will, in very short order, turn into the primary mechanism that software in general, but obviously AI-powered software and software written with AI will use to connect to these other services. I think it will work very well, and it will get over a lot of the hurdles that, if I go to ChatGPT today and I ask for an example of connecting, using Node.js to connect to the HubSpot API, because that API is, the training data will be relatively scarce. There've been all kinds of different versions of that API over time. The chance of me getting a working connection out of that is approximately 0. I might get lucky, right, and get it kind of 1 in 10 times. If we move to a world where actually all Origin needs to do, or indeed any tool that's being written needs to do, is connect to an MCP server that has a completely standardized interface, and then ask that MCP server, hey, I want my customer list for 2024 from HubSpot, please. And HubSpot's willing to, has its own obviously remote MCP server that can handle that. Then the whole API space and kind of data connectivity space just gets dramatically more straightforward. So that is both what I'm hoping will happen, and honestly what I'm almost certain will happen in short order.
So if I can break down what you guys are saying, so I love where we're going here, but I do want to make sure we pull back just to make sure we haven't lost anybody, because we did promise this one is prompt a product, and anyone can code a product. And if any business person sat in on our call right now, I'm very sure they're not following what we're saying. So the one thing I'd say is, one of the things you said, Luke, that I'd love to go back to, let's kind of break it down, is we've got front end. Traditionally, we had front end and back end. Then we had front end and back end, and then we had a bunch of different connectors. And then we had front end, back end, and a data warehouse. We had front end, back end, data warehouse, connectors, and microservices. Now we have front end, back end, data warehouse, connectors, and these new agentic agents. So now we're going to have these agentic agents running around. I do think it speaks to a trend that you guys are now talking about. So I just want to kind of call out the trend, and we can kind of focus in on AI development. But we went from, and IT as an industry has always done this. We had PCs on everybody's desks, and all the compute power was there, and all the data was there and stored there. Then we went to mainframes. Then we went back to the desk. Then we went to the internet. Then we went down to the phone. Now we're going again back to the cloud. So we go from big to little, big to little. It does seem like, from a development point of view, we are getting back to coding smaller, standalone agents, and we're going to call them agentic AI agents, but we're still just calling it smaller, self-contained bits of code doing things for you, ideally doing things proactively for you, because that's kind of the point to AI now. But either way, it's still code. It's still kind of a microservice type of concept, and it does speak well to what Origin does. It does speak well to what AI does, which is code these one little things together. But it does speak back to what Marcus says is, okay, how do we make sure all these things are talking together, and how do we make sure they're talking together in a secure and interesting way and not violating GDPR? But so let's kind of talk about, Luke, if you would, agentic AI, and when should a business person sitting down to prompt and say, hey, build me a code that, build me an application that manages my time better, and by the way, make it agentic AI. So what does that last little bit mean, and what does the agentic nature of the expectations we have for our code, even when they're smaller little bits, of being somewhat proactive, what does that mean in terms of development and AI's ability to help us code?
I think maybe from a business person's perspective, a nice kind of analogy is that, in the past, when we wrote software, the software would do a specific thing and it wouldn't do anything else. Right. So, you would try and do a particular search, right? And then you would find that it didn't have the filter that you actually needed, right? And then you'd have to go to the developers and say, hey, I need this filter, otherwise this software is useless to me. right? And you have to go through the whole loop, and then it gets deployed. And I feel like the way that the end user, the business user, will experience this agentic kind of transformation is that problem will start going away. To some extent, they may not even know that they are talking to an agent, or that their request is being serviced by one or more agents in its route to getting them the information. But because the agent is, to our purposes here, intelligent, at least within a domain, it's able to deal with things like this filter example without having any sort of hard-coded knowledge, right, about what that means. So if I'm searching for something in HubSpot, I can change wildly my query, right? And as long as the agent that is enabling that search understands how to query things in HubSpot, then it doesn't really matter, right? It's going to be able to get that information for me, and that is just transformational, right? Compared to maybe in the past where we had slow kind of iterative loops. I think that's how people will experience it, even though they may not know that they're talking to an agent.
It is the true microservice architecture promise that we had from back in the days. Right?
Very much, yeah.
But it does speak back to that data, and it does speak back to, and so Marcus and Erwin, you guys are our European experts. I do have a lot of data privacy concerns here, and how we're going to address that, because if I build this incredibly intelligent agent and I say, hey, I need to fly to Paris, and I happen to live in Idaho. Paris is a town in Idaho. Moscow is a town in Idaho. But if I happen to live in Europe, Paris is a fairly important town, and Moscow is a fairly important town, and they're very different things. And so there are stories. I spent more than a decade at Microsoft. There are stories of Microsoft executives flying in to meet my Microsoft executives and ending up in Bend, Oregon, because the airport name in Bend, Oregon is Redmond. And so they fly to Seattle, and then they take a flight to Redmond. Well, of course, Microsoft headquarters in Redmond. And if you're at this point, it was secretaries who were booking it. They said, oh, yeah, I can do a car service, or there's a flight. So let's fly them to Redmond. And so they're calling us from Oregon. And there's actually a sign on the wall at the Redmond airport that explains this to you, because it happened quite a bit. And so contextual awareness and knowing who the person is requires data. And so kind of that's where we were going originally when we started talking about MCP and talking getting into HubSpot. And so we've set that stage. How are we going to solve that, guys? So, how is that? So I built this small little agent. It's incredibly intelligent. I've dropped it in. How are we going to manage the data flows and making sure your agent's got the right information about you, but it's got the right information about you in a secure, clear and understandable way?
Should I take it? Or you guys want to jump in? I mean, this is one that I guess I'm quite passionate about, based on what we've seen with Origin in a positive way, because I think a lot of people quite rightly are worried about the code that AI is writing, and particularly if it's somebody that is not a security expert, for example. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen horror stories, right, of people writing code and then finding that it was just absurdly insecure, and it touches on these problems, right, that we have with the complexity of backend services, and making them secure is an expert role at the moment, which is not well covered by the model's training data, right? So it will not necessarily kind of get that to work. However, what we've seen with Origin is that there is tremendous power, actually, an opportunity in compliance, right? When it comes to standards and when it comes to security, right? For example, what it requires is both the imaginative nature, right, of the LLM, but constrained across, you might say, some axes, right, by, let's call it a challenger agent that has a rule set, right? So you can imagine it as like one agent checking on the work of the other agent. But because the other agent is only checking one specific rule, the outcome is much more binary, right? The problems with LLMs hallucinating things come when you give it very big kind of bulky prompts, as we've all experienced, right? Or ask it to do too many things. But if you ask an LLM, one specific question about a piece of code that it's looking at, it will get it right as long as the question is phrased correctly, right? It will get it right pretty much 100% of the time, right? So what we've realized is that actually that's an incredibly powerful tool if you can write the compliance rules properly. So if you have rules around coding standards, around architectural standards when it comes to how things should be secured, in an AWS language, that you want it in a particular, like, protected in a particular way, in particular kind of VNets or whatever, like that. Those rule sets are incredibly important, but can be used to properly constrain the outputs. And this is true across any domain, not just code, right? This could also be true across, making sure that no PII data, right, is being exposed by either a piece of code or indeed in an output, because you can check the outputs as you go through. And a year ago, you could do this. We were doing it with Origin, but it was still quite slow in reality. We found that with models like the one, or hardware from people like Cerberus, for example, or indeed models like Gemini 2.5 Flash is honestly a kind of revelation in terms of this type of thing. Just incredibly parallelized checks, right? Individual binary checks, right, across everything that comes out of the LLM is incredibly powerful, right, in this compliance space. So even though that's not mature yet, and isn't a kind of mainstay of what we're doing, for me, it's an incredibly positive story, because I can see that this will work, right? And all it requires is for people to define the rules about what the output or the architecture or the coding standards should be, and we should be in a position where we can get the best of the imaginative stuff that comes out of the LLM, but without the kind of wild craziness or release of data. Sure, it won't be perfect to start with, but I can see that this will work.
Yeah. Maybe if I could add on this one, just one sentence. Basically, everything you described and the question that you asked, Mike, right, and what you described as a solution, Luke, those problems we had also before, right? Those are typical SaaS problems. How do I make sure that I get the data back that are actually, only visible for my customer, for my tenant, or for that particular user? So we're talking about tenant isolation. We're talking about, security constraints and guardrails. We're talking about, you mentioned observability, right? So we're talking about agents monitoring other agents. So suddenly we have those, let's call it traditional SaaS concepts, being applicable, maybe solution is different, but being applicable to this new agentic AI world, right, that we have here.
Exactly, and the benefit being that, honestly, developers eventually get a little bit bored of looking at the list of rules, right? Like I'm very confident that the type of compliance we're talking about here, where agents are just constantly checking outputs, will actually be significantly more robust than the type of human checks that we would run now. And that's not criticizing the human beings doing, it's just human nature, right? That eventually we don't check all the rules for some reason, and that's when something slips through the net.
But you could see now businesses like whatever, but we have a Datadog, right? So, or, CloudWatch on AWS. So you could see companies producing agents that will actually do all that work that you just mentioned, right? Making sure that the code is
very much. In fact, I'd be amazed if startups, if there weren't 50 startups already working on this, if not already released with just those specific domains. Because that's the thing. I think it does at the moment. It does require specific domain knowledge to make that work. It's a bit like you're teaching it where the guardrails should be, and to do that you need to have expertise, right, in that topic area.
Okay, if not, then we just have a great idea to
It is a great idea. And so we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank all you guys for your time. Before we wrap it up, though, I am going to propose a fun little question to end, and that's going to be, what's your favorite prompt or trick that you've ever seen on a prompt? And I'll go first because it ties really well to what you guys were just saying. And so a guy I respect a lot, his name is Guy. He's CEO of FalcorDB. They've written a really impressive database specifically focused on AI workloads. Highly recommend you check them out. But Guy was giving a talk, and one of the things he said is his favorite question to ask an AI is, "Are you sure?" So the amounts of time actually comes back, forces the AI to reevaluate what it said and actually provide information. And every once in a while it says, "Yep, nope, I'm wrong." And so that one little trick has actually provided me an immense amount of amusement over the years. And so I'd like to take credit for it. It's not mine. It's actually guys from FalcorDB. So go check out their stuff. But it's my new favorite prompt trick out there. Marcus, you want to go next? Do you have a favorite prompt or thing you use when you're using AI?
So when I use it for more technical stuff, and also other things, right? I'm asking, what did I miss? Yeah, what else should I, be concerned about or wondering how it's happening? And I mean, it's by no means complete for sure, right? But it does give you some ideas. And more often than not, I do find a few gems in that. That was okay. Wow, that was actually something that I could have come up myself, but in the hectic of a day, I would probably miss out on that. But it's actually a good thought.
Oh, that's a great one. I had a similar run-in with GPT just yesterday, where I was really frustrated with it, and I finally just said, "Hey, I keep asking you for this, and you keep giving me something different. Why?" It says, "Oh, well, here's why." Well, why didn't you tell? So just asking it the question of, why are you doing this? It gave me a great answer. And okay, got it. Problem solved. All right.
So the question is, which tricks I'm using when I'm doing prompt?
What's your favorite trick or prompt that you use for AI these days?
So I'm being early adopter of Gen AI, right? I'm still very scared of a hallucination, right? Especially when I use Gen AI to provide technical answers, right? So I kind of always need to check. So what I definitely ask is to provide the sources of where did it actually find this knowledge. So I use a lot of Perplexity. Perplexity is by nature quite good with that. Amazon Q is also doing the same thing, but I actively also ask to provide a source so that I can go back and double check whether the answer that I got is actually correct.
Love it. Luke, you are the expert here, and I give you last time, not to put you on the spot or anything, build expectations, but
mine is probably more useful for technical people. And it's literally just my own observation is that whenever I'm approaching and something that I don't know that well, I try and make an initial judgment call about how new this technology is, as a proxy, right, for how much there might be in the training data. If I think it's something relatively new, MCP servers were a recent example, right, because it's very much kind of in flux and kind of new. Rather than asking it directly for something, I first ask it to find me a most recent simple example, right, a kind of hello world example, right, of what it is that I'm searching for. And I make it give me that URL, right, so that if I want to, I could look at it anyway. And then from that as a starting point, I then say, okay, now we're going to do this. Now I want you to help me do this more complicated thing. What I found is forcing it through that workflow means that it's building from a base of stability, right? If you try and jump directly to what it is that you're trying to do, which is obviously way more complicated, it will simply hallucinate the best answer that it can think of, which is honestly, in that context where it's something relatively new, it will be wildly inaccurate. And again, as we touched on already, you probably don't have the domain expertise to know that it's wildly accurate. So better to get it to give you something that is the most simple thing possible, and then you work together from that starting point.
Love it, and it's spectacular advice. And so, Luke, as you're our guest and as we're huge fans of what you're building over at Origin, for our listeners who are listening in, how do they find you? What do they go do? And what when they try your products, what's the first thing they should try?
We're on theorigin.ai. You can come and use the tool for free to get started. We let simple apps be built for free, basically ones that only take one story. And beyond that, it's a very, very low, just single month plan, right? That people can pay to $25 a month at the moment. It's absolute steal in my humble opinion. And I would say, yeah, but get on there and try and build stuff that will make your productivity increase. Right, this kind of anything that involves this kind of something you might have considered paying for from a SaaS perspective, or you are paying from a SaaS perspective, then give it a go. And I can promise that on the roadmap over the next few months, we've got all of the things we're talking about in terms of the ability to connect to other systems. All of that is coming in very short order. So then. Once you're signed up, you'll know as soon as it hits, because we'll let everybody know.
Love it. And by chance, do you happen to have a favorite app that you saw someone create, or funny one that you kind of left at and said?
I give you one that I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but like one that I keep seeing come up in the logs goes something along the lines of kind of like, just expletive, make me money, what the hell is the matter with you? Right? The number of people that are trying out, like, I don't know what they're hoping to get, but I feel like maybe they're just sort of like, they're just hoping that something wondrous, right, will come out of the other end. Sometimes it's related to kind of stock trading, or or things that are just obviously completely unfeasible, right, from a technology perspective. But they kind of tickle me when I see that people are trying to build them.
Invent a time machine, go to the 80s, buy Microsoft.
Easy, right? Why can't it do it?
When you figure that one out, please let me know. No, look, thank you for your time, Ermin, Marcus. Great as always to see you. Thank you guys for an amazing episode. Episode 12. Episode 12 is in 2 weeks. Really fun story about using AI to detect fraud by one of the founders of the industry. Amazing guy. So please join in. Luke, thank you again.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks for joining. Thanks.